Hi everyone, we're just waiting a few minutes. We just sent out the push notification, but we'll wait a couple minutes and let some more people slowly kind of get on. And then we'll start from there. Looks like people are tuning in. Hello everyone. Just as a reminder, if this is, oh, hello.
I think since we're right at time, we can actually get started if people join. I'll share the recording for later.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll get started then. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. I like having slides. I'm a very visual person. All right. So if you are new to this, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. So today we are going to kind of do a follow-up from the last video we did a couple weeks ago, which was all about the intro to keto. What is the keto diet? How does it work? Why do we use it for weight loss? So today the theme is going to kind of be, okay, we took all the information from part one and now we want to do keto. How do we start doing it? So that's going to kind of be what today's talk revolves around. So, like I said, if you're new here, welcome. If this is your second or third or fourth webinar, welcome back. My name is Mary. I'm a registered dietitian and I have a master's degree in nutrition, and I have a lot of experience in the health and nutrition field, in particular, nutrition education. And so for this webinar series, we really want it to be as interactive as it can be, even though I'm the only one really talking. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a questions bar. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in that questions chat. And if you don't have a question, but you see one in there that's really intriguing to you, go ahead and give it an upvote, because the more upvote something has, the more likely we'll be able to see it and I'll be able to answer it. But usually, for the most part, I think every time we've gotten to all the questions. So that's not a huge deal, but just upvote them and then it'll increase the likelihood it'll be answered. So like I said earlier, today is kind of a part two. You've decided to start the keto diet. What do you do? So today, excuse me, today we'll really look at what foods, and we'll really get into the food we should eat and we really need to focus on, and foods that we should avoid. We'll talk about tips to help us eat a little bit more fat and ways to keep us on the keto diet. And then kind of how I talked about in the first part one, keto isn't really meant to be a diet that we're on in perpetuity. We're not really meant to be on this keto diet for years and years and years. So ideally, we would be on it about 6 months, give or take some months, and then we would slowly transition to another diet. So today I'm going to talk about how to kind of transition from that strict keto to a healthy low carb diet. All right, let's get started. So I think number one question people have is, well, what foods can I eat? What are the foods I'm supposed to eat on the keto diet? So a little refresher from last time, the keto diet is essentially a really high fat, really low carb diet. Our protein for the most part is going to stay the same. So I really like this image down here because it kind of gives you those percentages. Carbs are going to be about 5 to 10% of our diet. Protein is going to be 20 to 25%, which is a normal, healthy protein recommendation. So we see that really doesn't change that much. And we see that bottom part, the huge part of our diet, is going to be fat. So I thought it would be a little bit easier to talk about this if I give an example. So I used myself as an example. I calculated if I was going to be on a keto diet, how many grams of carbs would I want to eat and how many grams of fat would I eat? So in a keto diet, like I said, it's really low carb. So you're going to want to stick between that 20 to 50 gram range. So for smaller people, you're going to be a little bit more on that 20 to 30, and larger people, we're going to be on that 40 to 50. So I did the calculations, which There's so many resources out there where you can just put in your activity, your age, your weight, your height, and it will give you about your carbs for the day. So mine is I eat about 2,000 calories a day. That would be about 25 to 30 grams of carbs a day, just about. So, it'll be kind of in that range. There'll be some days I'll be a little more closer to 30, some days I'll be closer to 25, but that's kind of my range. And so for grams of fat, if I'm eating 2,000 calories a day and I want to get between that 70 to 80% we see on this picture right here, that's about 140 to 160 grams of fat a day. So I thought it would be a little bit easier going forward if we use me as an example. So these are going to be my carbs and my fat. So going back to this picture, foods we're going to want to avoid are going to be those high carb foods, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think this is a really great picture to kind of show you what the keto diet looks like. So next, we have kind of this, okay, we need to eat really low carb and really high fat, but what foods have carbs in it? I think that's really important to know. So remember, you only get about 20 to 50 grams a day. So it's really important to try to avoid or restrict as much as we can those high carb foods, because one bagel can be like 25 grams of carbs. So just one bagel could be all your carbs for the entire day. So we really don't want to do that, right? We really want to make sure we can spread it out over the day and have a little bit more wiggle room. So we're going to want to really limit these high carb foods. So sources of carbs in our diet, the biggest one that people are probably the most familiar with is going to be grains or our breads, our rice, our bread, our bagels, our tortillas, beans, all of those are going to be pretty high in carbs. So they're things we're really going to want to limit if we can. But it's also important to remember what our high carb vegetables are. So some vegetables are going to have some carbs in it, a good amount of carbs. So like, for example, corn. One ear of corn is going to have 41 grams. So if we're only given 25 to 30, we could have one ear of corn and it's more carbs than we're allowed for the day. So it's going to be important to kind of take note of some of these high carb veggies. Fruit, I forgot to mention this earlier, but fruit is also going to be pretty high carb. Fruit, because it's sweet, it has a lot of sugar in it, and sugar is a carb. So it's just kind of important to have a general idea of what are these high carb foods, what are these things I really want to limit. And it's also important to remember that you still can eat these things just in really small portions if you do want to eat them. So like one day, if you're really craving potatoes, you're like, I have to have French fries today. Go for it. It would be way too many carbs to have like an entire McDonald's large fry. But if you want to get maybe a kid's fry, maybe have a few fries out of that, totally fine. You just have to remember it adds up towards that 20 to 50 grams a day. So carbs are going to be the foods we're going to limit, and we're going to focus on fat. So what foods have fat in it? So fat is going to be our dairy, meat, eggs, fish, nuts, oils, butters, things like that. So everything on this list is going to have fat in it. So we see fish is going to be a really good one. Avocado oils are going to be our vegetables that have a lot of fat in them. Chia seeds, oils, butter, stuff like that. So in every single meal, because we want to make sure we're getting a lot of fat, every single meal you should think, where's my fat coming from? You want to have 2 to 3 sources of fat, making sure you're putting olive oil or butter on everything, and really try to increase these foods right here. And so keto is also going to be a lot of Googling. how many grams of fat are in this, how many grams of carbs are in this, and then just kind of keeping track. So it really is helpful to know, to do those calculations, to log everything into that website and find out what your targets are. And then being aware of the sources, like these fats here. So this whole diet is not going to be just eating sources of fat, because I don't think anyone would enjoy that. So it's important to know, well, what are my carbs? What are my low carbs I can eat? And there's a ton of low carb veggies that are going to be your best friends on this diet. So things like broccoli, pepper, asparagus, carrots, these are going to be great foods to add to your diet to make sure we keep it really healthy, but also low carb. So you just have to remember, when you're throwing a vegetable onto your plate, how many carbs is this? And then just kind of count it up. And so it's going to be really helpful to become familiar with these low carb foods, especially when you're eating out, being like, oh, can I eat this? Well, I know it's a low carb veggie, so I'm probably fine. Things like that. And I know some people love fruit and would like never eat a diet that completely restricts fruit. So it's also nice to know, well, what are my low carb fruits? So let's just say it's like a hot July day in Phoenix. Well, I'm in Phoenix, so a very hot July day. And you're like, oh, I just need a watermelon. That sounds so nice. You can definitely have a watermelon. See, it's on our low carb fruit. We just need to make sure we're adding that to our daily carbs. So, for example, I would try to eat about 25 to 30 grams of carbs. So if I have 1 cup of watermelon, that's going to be 11 carbs. So that's definitely more than the broccoli that's going to have 2, but I can still do it. I just have to make sure, okay, the rest of my day, I don't really have that many carbs to work with. So that's kind of a way you can keep track and make sure you're still eating low carb, but still eating some of the things you want and the things you're craving. All right, so I did want to show some examples of some really healthy looking keto meals I found online. So you can see here that these meals are really colorful. There's still some veggies. I think keto gets this rep for being the like protein, cream, cheese diet. But it can really be pretty healthy. Like these meals look beautiful. I'm not on keto, but I would still eat a lot of this. So we see no real big sources of carbs. We're not seeing breads. We're not seeing tortillas. This top left picture with the broccoli and the beef, that's cauliflower rice. So we see like a lot of variety in color. And so these meals can be delicious. And it looks like that top right one with the almonds and the cucumber, that looks like a meal you could just throw together pretty quickly. So there's a ton of resources out there for some delicious, colorful recipes. All right, so now my tips and tricks. So number 1.
Keto recipes in the
Go for it.
recipe section of the app. We do have we do have a lot of keto recipes. Our data for the Aspire app is pulled mostly from USDA, and so I encourage anyone who's looking for good recipes to look at there. All the data we've compiled, we sum those together. So it's from official data sources mostly that we use to do that. I also seen the question, someone asked, how many calories should I be eating? The app says 1,700, but the other calculators say 1,200. We do have an FAQ section that describes how we use the BMI index. So that we use a pretty well-known formula for that. So look in the FAQ section. We describe how we get to the calories. We plug in the BMI index to figure out the total calories you'll need. So I encourage you to look at there. So those are just, and if there's any other questions, feel free to put it in the question section. Sorry, I'll stop now and let you, Mary, carry on with the rest of the discussion.
No, that was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, somewhere that has great compiled recipes like that is such a good resource, especially with the keto diet, because it can be kind of intimidating thinking about eating that much fat. So it's awesome you guys have that right at your fingertips. And I will say, if you said the app says 1700 and somewhere else said 1200, 1200 is really not a ton of calories. So I would say the one that this app gives you with the 1700 sounds a bit more accurate. 1200 is a really low calorie. So I would stick with the 1700, and it sounds like it's from reputable sources. And yes, I keep forgetting to say that, but definitely if you have questions, plug it into the chat. So here are my tips and tricks for doing the keto diet and staying on the keto diet. Number one is going to be drinking plenty of water. If you remember from my first talk last week, one of the first things your body does when you start doing the keto diet is you lose a lot of your body water. So drinking plenty of water and replacing that water is going to be really important. It also helps with, in conjunction with this number two, that's funny, with this number two tip, to remember to eat your veggies. So eating your veggies and drinking water are going to be really helpful to keep you regular. When you switch to a really low calorie diet or low carb diet, carbs are going to be your biggest source of fiber. And so when you lose fiber, you can really kind of experience some GI distress. So eating those veggies are going to make sure you keep a little bit of fiber coming in, and then drinking plenty of water are really going to help with some stomach aches and some constipation associated with keto. Your biggest help with doing the keto diet is going to be meal planning. Meal planning is going to be really huge, especially in the beginning, because you really do want to make sure you're eating as few carbs, whatever your range is, and you're eating enough fat. That's going to be really important for this diet. So sitting down and meal planning, trying to count out where your carbs are, where your fat is coming from is going to be really big. And this diet, because it is so restrictive, you're going to be cooking a lot for the most part. So meal planning just helps make it really easy. I'm a huge meal planner. And so my preference is I like doing it all on like a Sunday. I want to plan my meals. I want to grocery shop. And then I like to come home and prep my veggies. I'll peel carrots. I'll chop potatoes. Even if I don't cook things, I just get them ready to be cooked, because I don't know if you've ever tried this, but during the week, you don't want to be chopping and peeling and cutting for forever. But if you want to make a nice meal, sometimes that adds like 30, 45 minutes to your cooking time. So I just kind of try to get all of that done on Sunday, and it really makes a huge difference throughout the week. Doing your research is also going to be really big with this diet, trying to become familiar with those low carb veggies, those high carb veggies, those high carb foods, and your high fat foods. Knowing those kind of like the back of your hand is going to be really helpful, especially in those situations where you're eating out or you're meal prepping. It's just going to make things a lot easier. Learning to read food labels, we'll do that in a second, especially when you're grocery shopping. It's going to be really nice to know, is this enough fat? Is this too many carbs? Stuff like that. Another tip, I actually didn't think about this until I kept seeing this over and over again when I was prepping for this talk, but trying a low carb diet first. Going from a, regular, your normal diet to something so restrictive like a keto diet can be really hard, because it can be, like I said, so restrictive. So kind of starting with a low carb diet, getting used to identifying carb sources, counting your carbs, meal prepping, meal planning is going to make that transition to keto a lot easier. And use your online resources. On this app, it sounds like you have such great resources for recipes and information. Coming to a talk like this, you're already doing such a good job showing up here. There's so many online resources for this diet. My recommendation, like it sounds like they have such reputable resources on this app, if you are doing some Googling, I would recommend finding recipes from dietitians. So that is denoted at the end of someone's name with an RD. Just that way, I mean, I could be a little biased because I'm a dietitian, but that way you know that the macronutrients are correct. You know that they counted out the carbs and they're low enough and that there's enough fat in there. So that would be my recommendation. And I'll just make this one really quick. On food labels, they will tell you the grams of carbs and the grams of fat per serving. So, for example, if you have a cup and a half of this, you would have 46 grams. That's a ton of carbs, especially on this diet. But let's say you cut that in half and you only have 3/4 of a cup, then you have 23 carbs. Okay, still a lot. Maybe you cut back a little bit more. So that can kind of be how you can play with the food labels using that information. So the serving size is going to be important, and then the grams, and just kind of trying to stick to your 25 to 30. And okay, I have two more. I'll try to go through them pretty quick and then we'll take questions. And remember, if you have any questions, first relating to keto, definitely throw them in there. But if you have one other quick little nutrition question, I'm sure we have time to get to it. So, like I said earlier in this one and in part one, keto is something you don't really want to be on for years and years and years. You're probably thinking maybe 6 months, 3 months, maybe to a year. So after that, how would you transition back to a healthy low carb diet? Maybe you discovered, wow, this low carb diet really works for me. I really like it. First and foremost, you likely will gain a little bit of weight back. That just always happens once we transition out of something like a weight loss diet. You always gain a little bit back. That's totally normal. So the first thing I would do when switching from keto to low carb is I would start by reintroducing healthy carbs and cutting back on fat. So those healthy carbs you're really going to want to start reintroducing are going to be your veggies. So if you still want to stay low carb, you want to pick the carbs that are going to give you the most bang for your buck. That's going to be your fruits and your veggies. Those have the most micronutrients, they have fiber in them, they're going to be your overall healthiest foods. So those are the carbs you're going to want to prioritize. So we're going to put back in our veggies, we're going to put back in our fruits, but we're going to do this slowly because fruits and veggies, especially, you're bringing back in carbs to your diet, that comes with fiber. And so fiber, if you increase it too much, too fast, it can really lead to some GI distress. So you're just going to want to slowly, every day add a little bit more and a little bit more. The next thing is, let's say you want to increase your carbs a little bit more, then I would do whole grain bread. Your whole grain breads are going to have a lot of those micronutrients and that fiber and all that good stuff that your fruits and veggies are going to have. So those would be the carbs I would start prioritizing, and then just start slowly kind of cutting back on the fat, using a little less butter, maybe switching to seafood only a couple times a week. Maybe you cut back on some of that dairy. So just cutting back on those sources of fat is going to be the next thing you're going to want to do. So those you would do together. And last but not least, this was a question I kind of anticipated people having, so I thought I would make a slide on it because people always ask, well, what supplements? Do I need supplements? So supplements can be great, especially in such a restrictive diet like keto. So if you needed any help getting enough fat in your diet, MCT oil is something that is pretty readily available at most places. And that's going to be it's a liquid fat. It kind of has like this oily consistency. And this is a really good thing to maybe add to your water, put in soups, put in a smoothie, add to a juice, anything like that. And it's going to be really concentrated fat that's going to help you get enough fat. So that can be really useful on a keto diet. I will say it is a little bit more on the expensive side, but something you only need like a tablespoon at a time. So you might only need like 2 or 3 bottles of this for your entire time you're keto. So it's pretty worth it. When you first start keto, to help with some of those keto flu symptoms and, all that water loss you go through in the beginning, supplementing with some electrolytes might be nice, especially if you're starting to experience some symptoms. And like I've said a few times on here, you're cutting back a lot on your fiber when you cut back on your carbs. So supplementing with some fiber, if you start to notice you're experiencing some GI distress, you're getting constipated, incorporating some fiber would be really nice to just kind of help with that discomfort. And lastly, if you've been on a keto diet for a while, a really low carb diet, or you're just not a huge fruit and vegetable person, supplementing with a multivitamin can be really helpful to kind of get you some of those micronutrients and vitamins that you might be missing because you're not eating fruits and vegetables. All right, so that is all I had for you today. Remember that there is a chat box at the bottom where you can put some of your questions for me if you have any. And I'm going to jump back on.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely learn a ton. So thank you. Going into questions. So the first question is, I missed the first few minutes, so you may have already said this. Do you look at total carbs or net carbs? So just for the audience, net carbs is total carbs minus dietary fiber and sugar alcohol.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good question. I anticipated this question, so I kind of did a little bit of research, and it looks like the jury's kind of still out on it. You can count them or not. For most things, it's only going to be the difference from like 2 to 3 carbs. So my personal opinion is I would count them. I would do net carbs. So that means, let's say you look at a food label and it says there's 10 grams of carbs in it, but 3 grams of fiber. So when you go to count that towards your total, you do the 10 minus the 3, and it would be 7 carbs. That's how I would do it.
Awesome. And so just for the users of the app, we do have a setting for food labels to turn on net carbs. If you go to settings, you can do that, and so it automatically calculates that for you. The second question that wasn't answered is, do you have to use the keto test strips with this diet? It was required on Atkins, which is pretty much the same diet. Have you heard of that?
I have, yes. Yeah, it's funny. Atkins is pretty much the same thing. So you don't have to. That could be kind of a personal thing. Because I know it does cost money to buy them. So if you're curious, if you want to know in the beginning of the diet, oh, am I in ketosis? That could be something that you do if you wanted to, but I don't think you have to.
Awesome. So I think that's about all the questions we had.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, thank you. Great talk. Thank you everybody for joining. I'll post a link to this video in the community section. And then Mary, I guess we'll see you next year.
Woohoo! Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy 2023, everybody. Thank you so
Happy
much
to.
for logging on.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.